Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the Thames Discovery Programme Tideway talk. We have Lauren here from the Portable Antiquities Scheme, who's going to be talking to us about her work. Before we go into the talk, I thought I'd just introduce myself. My name's Helen, and I'm an archaeologist with the Thames Discovery Programme. One of my other colleagues is also going to be joining us this evening, Josh, who's another archaeologist with the project, but he's just doing bedtime, so he may log in a minute or so. For those of you who don't know who we are, Thames Discovery Programme is a community archaeology project. We've been running for about 12 years now, and what we do is we monitor and record the archaeological features on the Thames Foreshore throughout Greater London. So we have one of the longest archaeological sites in the country. So it runs from Richmond in West London all the way through to Erith, to the Dartford Crossing in southeast London. And we've got about 40 key sites along the river where there's significant archaeology. Quite a lot of it is under threat from erosion caused by climate change, from human action, from boats on the river. And it's damaging the archaeology. So our volunteers, in normal times, our volunteers are out all year round monitoring the archaeology, keeping a record of what's changing and recording what's been lost. And we usually have a programme of fieldwork as well that happens. Obviously, that hasn't been the case for the last year. We've been able to do a few monitoring visits last year, but we weren't able to do any fieldwork. And touch wood and fingers crossed, we might be able to do some more this year, hopefully. Here's Josh. Hi, Josh. Do you want to just say hi? Part of our project is supported by Tideway, which is the Thames Super Sewer project, and that funds Josh's post, and that's mainly to support work with children and young people. We've been taking schools out onto the foreshore and youth clubs, and we've got a young archaeologists club called the Tadpoles. And also Tideway are supporting our public events. So in previous years, we've been doing talks and workshops and trainings and things all supported by Tideway. Obviously, we can't do in-person events at the moment, so we switched to having a programme of online talks this winter. This is the third one that we've got planned. Okay, looks like people have, well, there's a few more people logging in, but what I'll do now is I'm going to hand over to you, Lauren, so you can start your talk, if that's all right.
Okay, yeah.
Let me pick the presenter. There we go.
Okay, well, thank you for that lovely introduction, and also for inviting me to speak for you tonight. As Helen said, my name's Lauren, and I'm the Outreach Officer for the Portable Antiquities Scheme. This mostly involves looking after our volunteer recruitment and training programme via the Past Explorers project, but I also get to do fun stuff like this, where I get to tell people all about what we do and how cool it is, and talk about some of the really exciting finds that come up through the scheme. So I'm going to start this talk by giving a little bit of an overview of what the scheme does, how it started, and what we do on a sort of national scale. And then I'm going to look at specifically London, and then we'll just finish by looking at some of the amazing finds that have come up through the scheme in London. Oh, and immediately my slides are not moving. There we go. Sorry about that. So the Portable Antiquities Scheme, we are a big public archaeology programme, and we exist to record archaeological objects discovered by members of the public in England and Wales. Scotland's got its own system. So basically that's finds that are not from planned archaeological excavation. It's things that ordinary members of the public have found. The majority of these come from people who are doing metal detecting, but it also includes finds from people's gardens, objects found walking the dog, doing building work. We've had stuff come up in molehills, so kind of anything really. And in London, of course, from mudlarking, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. And all of these finds are recorded onto our big database, where they're available for everybody to research. So we are run by the British Museum, and in Wales by Amgueddfa Cymru, National Museum Wales. And we sit within the Learning and National Partnerships Department at the British Museum as part of the Portable Antiquities and Treasure team. So the Portable Antiquities half looks after the wider PAS, and then the Treasure team administers the treasure process. But I just want to talk a bit about why we do what we do. And to do that, I need to take you all the way back to 1997. So just picture it, Tony Blair's the new Prime Minister, the Spice Girls are in the music charts, and Titanic is on in the cinema. But even more exciting than that, a new piece of legislation came into force, the Treasure Act in 1996. And this act replaces the ancient law of treasure trove in England and Wales, and it was brought in to give protection to certain archaeological finds and also to increase opportunities for museums to acquire them for the public benefit. So under the new act, finders are legally obliged to report items of potential treasure, and then these items are offered to museums for acquisition, and a financial reward is shared between the finder and landowner. So I'm just going to give a basic outline of treasure here because it's quite a in-depth definition, and you can find the full definition on our website. But the main thing to note is that we're talking about treasure with a capital T. So treasure can be quite an emotive word when it's applied to archaeology, but it is a very specific legal term, and that's how we use it within the scheme. And you can see a few examples up here of things that constitute the definition of treasure. The other point is that definition only covers certain groups of objects. So on a yearly basis, treasure accounts for just under 2% of the objects recorded onto the database. So you can see there's an awful lot of stuff that's not by the legal definition treasure, but is still archaeologically important. And so it was kind of realised quite early on that some sort of mechanism was needed to kind of capture the information about these non-treasure objects. This was already being done locally in some areas through museums and the like, but there was kind of a real need to pull it all together on a national scale and to increase the coverage as well. So the pilot project was launched in 1997, and this covered 6 areas of England and Wales. And then this was then extended nationally in 1999 with funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund, now the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And then finally, in 2006, administration of the PAS transferred to the British Museum with funding now from the DCMS. So as mentioned, the scheme is overseen by the central team at the British Museum. We then have a network of 40 finds liaison officers, and they're based in organisations across England and Wales, and these are kind of like museums, local authorities and other heritage organisations. The finds liaison officers, or FLOs as we like to shorten it to, they're supported by 5 national finds advisors, and then most FLOs also have a fantastic volunteer team around them to help with their object recording. So as you can see, it's a massive partnership project, which allows us to work within the local areas where the finds are being discovered, but also to share the data on a national scale. This image gives you an outline of what happens to finds that are reported to us, although obviously things are a little bit different with the current kind of environment. But in normal times, a finder will make contact with their local FLO, and you can find a list of them all on our contacts page, which I've just put at the bottom of the slide there. The FLO will examine the find, decide whether or not it should be recorded. So obviously we can't record absolutely everything. So the FLOs kind of make a judgment based on age and the archaeological significance of the object. So generally we try to record everything from before 1500 AD, then as much as possible from the sort of 16th and 17th centuries, and then a bit more selectively after that. Although we do make exceptions for significant items, items with strong local connections, or those that have got quite a good traceable history. If the items are not recorded, they get returned to the finder along with a kind of bunch of information about its identification. Otherwise, the flow will take the object in to record, and this just allows them to spend a bit more time researching the object, identifying it, measuring it, weighing it. They'll do a series of photographs, and then they will create the database record for it. After that, the object goes back to the finder unless it's treasure, in which case it goes through the treasure process, which I'm not going to talk about because that's a whole talk in itself. So we just collect the data about the find and then return it to the finder. This is known as preservation by record because the digital record stands in for the object itself for researchers. Therefore, it's vital that we capture as much information as possible to ensure that this data is useful to researchers. And what you can see on screen here is kind of like a typical database record for a rather lovely socketed axe head, if you like that sort of thing, which I do. That's a really nice example. And then inset at the bottom is just the sort of kind of information that we try to capture about each of these objects. So of course, it's not just about recording finds. Obviously, a really big part of our work involves outreach. This includes liaising with detectorists, both to record the finds, but also to promote best practice. So finders don't have to report their finds to us unless they are potential treasure. So it's vital that we engage with detectorists and finders to encourage them to record their objects. We also engage with the wider public to tell them about what we do and to encourage them to learn about their local archaeology. We provide volunteering opportunities for people to actually get involved with the archaeology. So we've had over 600 volunteers in the last 6 years. And we've also got a programme of training to train them up in identifying objects and recording them. And of course, we're also involved in a wide range of research projects across the country that are using PAS data to transform our understanding of the past. So that's a brief overview of the PAS on the national scale, but I'm now going to look at how London fits into this. So as I mentioned earlier, some local areas were recording public finds prior to the creation of the PAS. And one of these areas was actually London. So the Port of London Authority have always required mudlarks to report finds from the Thames Foreshore. And before the PAS, these finds were taken to the Museum of London, where they were dealt with by the curators there. Then when the PAS was created, a dedicated finds liaison officer role was also created for London, and this is still based at the Museum of London. And our current finds liaison officer is Stuart Wyatt, and he's absolutely fantastic. If you find anything in London, he's super friendly and extremely knowledgeable about archaeological finds. So yeah, great. But as I mentioned, the majority of London finds on the database come from people mudlarking. I imagine we've got a few mudlarks watching this, but for everyone else, mudlarking is basically searching the foreshore for historic objects, sometimes with a metal detector, but mostly eyes only. And the term the term originated in the 18th century, and it was used first to describe people that scavenged in the foreshore mud for items of value that they could then sell on to make a living. Nowadays, modern mudlarks are more interested in the historical value of the objects and what they can contribute to our knowledge of London's past. And you also now need a permit from the Port of London Authority in order to search the foreshore. And if you go down there with your license, this is the kind of thing you can expect to see. So I think at first glance, it's sort of a jumble of stones and bits and pieces. But I actually love this picture because the more you look at it, the more you can see. And this is where I'm in awe of the skill of the mudlarks, because they can look at something like this and pull out something like this, which is just like the tiniest Roman intaglio, and it's dark blue and it's less than a centimetre big. And somehow, with her eagle eyes, Jo Cook managed to spot this on the foreshore, so it's absolutely amazing. So obviously London is a lot larger than the area around the River Thames, so I should say that not all of the finds from London are from the Thames Foreshore. We also get things from people's gardens, and I've put a few examples up on the screen here. So the most famous is probably the Hackney Hoard, which you can see here on the left. This was found in a Hackney back garden during landscaping works, and it's a hoard of about 80 gold American, let me get this right, $20 bullion coins known as double eagles. And they were buried by a Jewish family who'd fled persecution in Nazi Germany, and they brought with them their life savings in gold coins. And then when the war broke out, they buried them in the garden for safekeeping. And then unfortunately, the house got bombed, like so many did during the war, and the secret location of the coins was lost until they were discovered, I think, in 2007. And it's a really amazing story, so I recommend looking it up because there's a whole lot more to it than I've just put there. But basically, just to say that, as you can see, people find all sorts of things in their gardens. And I know, for example, I'd be chuffed if I found that beautiful hand axe in mine. People also find things when building work's being carried out. So there's always a lot of building going on in London. And this stuff tends to be a little bit later, like the example shown here. So the archaeological layers in London are quite a bit deeper. So you're kind of only hitting them on the really big building projects like Crossrail, at which point they're going to be subject to archaeological investigation and they'll be recorded as part of the site rather than through us. But just to say that they're all lovely things and they all add to the fabric of London's past. So I've talked a little bit about where the finds are coming from, but what kind of material are we getting? So chronologically, we've got all of the periods represented from the Paleolithic right up to the present day. And this chart just shows the finds recorded as a percentage of the whole for London in blue and against the national figures in orange. And you can see that London largely follows the national trends, and the results are probably what you might expect. So you've got small amounts of material from the prehistoric and also the early medieval periods, and then larger amounts from the Roman, medieval and post-medieval periods. Although it should be noted that the Roman numbers are a little bit skewed because of the number of coin hoards that are discovered, and some of these are massive. I think like the Froome hoard is like over 50,000 coins, so you can see it to sort of skew the data a little bit. But the thing to say is the main difference that you can see is that the vast majority of material recovered in London comes from the post-medieval period compared to nationally, which is Roman. So you've got around 52% of finds compared to about 20% nationally. And then in terms of materials that the objects are made from, London diverges a little bit from the national picture again. So obviously copper alloy dominates both sets of data, which is to be expected because a lot of the finds coming from metal detecting. But London's got much higher numbers of lead alloy and ceramic objects, as well as items made from bone. So that's the animal skeletal material. Bone doesn't even make it into the top 10 of the objects that are recorded nationally. And there's a few reasons for this, but mainly, obviously, by the nature of the discipline, the detectorists are looking for the metal objects, so they're simply not going to come across bone that often. On the foreshore, however, finders are kind of by and large searching by their eyes, so they're more likely to spot the bone items. And it's also a question of preservation. So skeletal material doesn't survive very well archaeologically, so it either needs kind of very waterlogged or very dry conditions to survive. And the Thames River mud provides this. It's a nice waterlogged anaerobic environment, so the decay is kind of slowed down or halted completely. And this means some very well preserved organic items turn up on the foreshore that we don't see so much elsewhere. And we'll come across a few examples of those as we go on. And the same goes for lead alloy as well. So these are all lead alloy tokens. The examples on the left are from what you might call sort of normal soil environments, whilst the ones on the right are from the Thames Foreshore. And you can see hopefully that the details are a bit more crisp and the colours a lot darker and kind of more akin to what it would have been when the tokens were brand new. So the non-London finds have gone this kind of white colour as the lead has begun to corrode away. And that white is the corrosion product. And finally, the last graph, In terms of the type of object being recorded, the picture in London is a bit different again. So you've got a lot of items associated with trade, so jettons, tokens, cloth seals, which is probably to be expected for a city that's kind of been the centre of commerce for centuries. And you also get toys in the top 10, which I think is quite nice. And then nationally, the top 10 seems to be more dominated by buckles, brooches, and other sort of clothing adornments and such. Although I should bear in mind that this kind of reflects the material that's been recovered and is not necessarily what was kind of used at the time. Anyway, I'd like to spend the rest of the talk looking at some of the objects that have actually been found in London, and hopefully that's a lot more interesting than graphs. So we've got over 10,500 objects recorded for London, and it's quite difficult to narrow these down. So what I've tried to do is include objects that give a kind of broad picture of London, as well as some of the kind of really cool artifacts that have come up. But I would urge you to sort of log onto the database and have an explore for yourself as well, because there's just so much to see. So I thought I'd start with the oldest items on the database from London. And I think perhaps people don't often think of London in prehistoric terms. I don't, certainly. But there are plenty of finds recorded that point to London's earliest inhabitants. And some of the very oldest, and in my opinion, the most beautiful, are the Paleolithic hand axes, which is what I've got on the slide here. And these date back to at least 500,000 BC, so they are insanely old. And I just think they display the most kind of incredible level of technical skills, like they're absolutely beautiful. And then in the corner, there's just a reminder that their modern counterparts pop up in the Thames as well. Then from the oldest to the most recent finds, I quite like the more modern ones because they often have quite interesting stories attached to them. And there's often like this tantalizing potential to kind of trace them back to somebody. And I'm sure people might recognize some of the ones that are up here. But in the top left, you've got the so-called Doves type, which is this bespoke typeface that was commissioned for the Doves Press in the early 1900s. And what happened was the two founders ended up in a really bitter feud. So when the press closed, one of them just dumped the entire typeface, the punches and the matrices, all of them into the River Thames, so that the other one could never recreate the typeface. But unfortunately, they weren't gone forever, or maybe fortunately for us, because we get to see this beautiful typeface. But yeah, so these little stamps keep popping up from time to time on the foreshore. Next to those, we've got something completely different, the Wimbledon tennis medals of Peter Fleming. So Fleming was the doubles partner of John McEnroe in the 70s and 80s, and between them, they won 52 doubles titles, including Wimbledon. And the medals were actually lost during a burglary and ended up in the Thames. Presumably, they were ditched because they're very traceable. Then below that, again, you've got Victoria Cross, and this one's dated to the 5th of November of 1854, and it was awarded for the Battle of Inkerman, which took place during the Crimean War. There are two Victoria Crosses from this battle whose current locations are unknown, so this medal could actually be one of those, and research is still ongoing in order to pin the identity of the recipient down. And then finally, we've got this funky little egg. This is from an art project that took place, I think, around 2012. And they made 5,000 ceramic eggs. And these were laid out in the shape of the River Thames on Sussex Downs. This egg is number 2,664. The eggs were then deposited in the river on an Easter weekend in 2012. And now they're just sort of occasionally washing up on the foreshore. So we've seen the oldest and the youngest objects, and I think they're both kind of evocative in their own ways. And of course, there's an awful lot in between, and they all speak of the social history of London. So I've tried to organise the rest of them sort of thematically in order to kind of give a flavour of this. So starting with trade and commerce. So as I mentioned earlier, there are many objects associated with trade that have been recorded from London. Obviously, London's been a busy port and trade hub since the time of the Romans, and this is well represented in the finds. So what we've got here up in the top left is a lovely coin weight, and this would have been used for checking the authenticity of coins, making sure they weighed the right amount, and that you weren't being sort of diddled out of some money, which is obviously very important if you're a merchant. And then below those, a little bit smaller, we've got these apothecary weights, and these were used for measuring out medicines, and the little symbols on them refer to the weights that they measured. Below that again, this is a beautifully preserved cloth seal. So in the medieval period, quality of cloth was strictly controlled and taxed. So they would attach these cloth seals onto the bales of cloth to show that it'd been checked and the appropriate tax had been paid, and also that the cloth met quality standards. And they're quite nice objects. They've often got quite a bit of information on them. So this example is really nicely preserved one. It's got a date on it. You often get initials, you get shields of office. So yeah, really great little items. Moving to the middle at the top, you've got a jeton. These are basically accounting tokens, and they'd be moved around a board or a checkered cloth to do sums, basically, much like you would with an abacus. We get quite a lot of these coming up through the scheme, actually. And then we've got the tokens below those. So you've got copper alloy trade tokens, like the one at the bottom, and they tend to be really detailed, and they can contain quite a lot of information. So you've got the date, you've got the initials of the issuer, sometimes you've got a location, and sometimes there's kind of objects on there that kind of refer to maybe the pub that's issued it, or sometimes it's like a loaf of sugar. So there's all kinds of like social history information kind of contained in these tiny little objects, which is why we really like to record those in particular. And then over on the right, we've got the lead alloy tokens. And again, you can see how nicely preserved the examples from London are. Some of them can be quite detailed. So the ones at the bottom, they've got these there's things on both sides, and you've got a nice little cannon picture. There's a checkerboard. And then the other ones are uniface, like the one above, the cross and pellet token. And pictured above it just there is a coin, is a token mold for making similar tokens. Don't get too many of those, so that's quite a nice find. And you also get some quite funky shapes with the tokens. So we've got things that like octagons and also like heart-shaped tokens. So nice little objects. Obviously, related to trade, you've got money. And again, all of the periods are represented in the finds from London. So top left, there's this great little hoard of Iron Age coins. I think they are potens. You've also got lots of Roman finds, lots of Roman coins. So we've got this nice radiate coin of Electus. I quite like this because it was found by a schoolgirl in Richmond Park. And then in the very bottom left, this one is a little bit grotty, but I've included it because it's a Republican coin and it shouldn't really be here because it predates the Roman conquest, but it's here in London, so that's kind of cool. Right in the middle is another really cool find as well. This is a Roman forger's mold for making counterfeit coins, and again, quite an unusual find. And then below that again, it's not strictly a coin, it's a medallion. It's a medallion of Marcus Aurelius. And this one's a really important find because it's a type that is not previously listed anywhere when it was found. So really important find. And then over on the far right, you've got some of the later coinage. So we've got an early medieval silver penny of Edgar right at the top. The next one down is probably very familiar to any of our finders watching. It's a medieval silver hammered coin, and this one's a penny of Henry VI. And again, really nicely preserved, nice and crisp details on there. And then below that is a shilling of James I, and this was found in London, and it was also minted at the Tower of London, and so double London connection. We also get an awful lot of finds relating to fashion and beauty. So I think things that you can imagine sort of really easily falling off clothes as people kind of got into their ferry on the way home or whatever. So yeah, top left, we've got this beautiful cosmetic mortar, and that would have been used for grinding down cosmetic powders. This one's got a lovely little cow's head on the end of it, and this would be sort of late Iron Age to early Roman. And originally you would have had a kind of a pestle or a grinder to go with it, and they would have been suspended from your belt using the loop that's there. But yeah, this is a lovely example. Then below that, we've got this medieval ring, and I just love the little leopard that's inscribed on this. It's been sort of outlined so it's a bit clearer. And I guess perhaps the engraver wasn't too familiar with leopards, but I kind of think it's quite charming anyway. And then next to that are my favourite mystery items that I use for outreach events. So again, I think a lot of the mudlarks watching are going to be really familiar with these, but maybe not everybody. And they're of course wig curlers from the kind of Georgian period. So you'd kind of wrap the damp hair of the wig around it and then leave it to set. At the top then, in the top right, we've got things to do with hair. So you've got some Roman hairpins made from bone, including a picture of one kind of in situ, as it would be on the foreshore. Again, just sort of highlighting just how difficult it is to spot stuff. And next to that, you've got a medieval wooden comb. And again, both these kind of organic materials really nicely preserved by the river. Then finally, in the bottom corner, we've got things that are just more associated with dress. So we've got a couple of medieval dress hooks, a Roman glass bead, a gold medieval lace tag or aglet, and those were kind of like the decorative and protective end for your kind of lace or cord, so a bit like the plastic tips on your laces. And then finally, we've got a gold Tudor button and a cufflink. And it was Valentine's Day yesterday, so this one's quite apt because it's got a nice little kissing couple on it. So it's quite sweet. So next we've got some things relating to life in the home. So you've got your thimble and your bone needle. And beneath that, a medieval spindle wheel. So this was at a time when lots of women would be spinning yarn at home by hand. And the spindle wheel basically went onto the end of the spindle to keep the spindle turning round and the momentum going when you're sort of spinning the yarn. And obviously this was later replaced by the spinning wheel. And then you've got a post-medieval fork and spoon. That's pretty self-explanatory. And beneath that, you've got a post-medieval candle snuffer, which you sort of just close around the wick, a bit like a pair of scissors. Now, I mentioned toys earlier. London turns up a lot of these medieval and post-medieval toys, and I kind of love them. I feel like children are sometimes absent in the archaeological record, but here we've got like an abundance of life in miniature. I just think they're absolutely wonderful. These are all to scale as well. So on the left, for comparison, I've included a full-size tankard, and then next to that is its like teeny weeny little counterpart. Right at the top, you've got these lovely little plates, and then sometimes these even have kind of food items drawn on them, so like a fish platter and all sorts. They're quite a lot of fun. Next to that, you've got obviously a chair and a part of a toy building, which I think looks a little bit like a chapel or something like that. Right in the middle, obviously, candlestick. You've got this beautiful little toy pocket watch, and then at the bottom, you've got a toy pistol and a toy cannon. And the crazy thing about the toy cannon is that they used to use real gunpowder in them, which I can't quite believe. But we do have examples where the end of the cannon has basically exploded off because of the gunpowder. So we've talked about what children did for fun, but what about the adults? I'll keep it clean. We've got gaming and gambling. So right at the top, we've got some dice made from bone, and quite a few of these actually turn up. And A lot of them are almost identical, like the ones pictured here. So there's a group of about 40 or so that all have the kind of double circle and dot design, and they've been found near the site of Fleet Prison. And they're kind of so kind of uniform in design that there's a kind of hypothesis that they may actually have been made by just one single prisoner who was interred there. Below that, we've got some gaming counters. So the one on the left that looks a bit like a sort of drafts piece, that one's Roman and it's made from bone. But I actually prefer the one on the right. It's post-medieval, so a bit more modern. But it's been repurposed from a nice kind of sherd of Delftware. And I just love it's just got this lovely little image of rooftops and possibly ship's masts in the background. And yeah, I wonder if they kind of chose that particular bit specifically or not, I don't know, but it's just a lovely little piece. Right at the bottom, yeah, probably another familiar find to a lot of the mudlarks. It's the clay tobacco pipe. So the complete one is a bit more unusual because the stem is usually quite fragile and they tend to break, obviously. So the example above that is more, that's more what we're used to seeing. Then in the centre, we've got a medieval tuning peg made from bone. And yeah, this is just used to tighten the strings on a stringed instrument. So just like they do with guitars and stuff nowadays. And then finally on the right, we've got items associated with drinking. So you've got a Roman flagon sherd, a post-medieval glass wine bottle, known as a onion bottle due to the kind of bulbous shape that it's got. And then below that is my favourite one, which is the terminal from an early medieval drinking horn. And it's just got this lovely kind of zoomorphic end. It's a funny little creature. But yeah, it's beautiful. And of course, we get quite a lot of material relating to religion. So we get lots and lots of pilgrim badges from the foreshore. There's about 130 recorded so far. And as you can see from the images here, like some of them are so exquisite in their detail. So obviously you would have had lots of pilgrims coming to London on pilgrimage, but also people passing through London on the way to other pilgrimage destinations. And basically what you do, you'd get to your pilgrim site, you'd buy a badge as a souvenir of your pilgrimage, and then you'd wear it on your hat or on your cloak. And this is obviously, I think the height of this was in the 14th and 15th centuries. That's when it was at its most popular. And lots of these end up in rivers, not just in the River Thames, like rivers all over the country. And we're not sure if they were deliberately thrown in or whether they fell off by accident. But either way, they're just really lovely little objects. So if I just take you through them quickly. Top left, you've got one for Our Lady of Wimbledon, and I think it shows the Virgin and Child sort of cradled in a crescent moon. So Wimbledon, obviously in London now, but previously it was a shrine just outside the city. Next to that, you've got the head of Thomas Becket, who obviously famously the murdered Archbishop of Canterbury, and he appears on quite a lot of pilgrim badges actually. Bottom left, a bit of a grisly one. This one is depicting the murder of St. Alban. And then next to that, you've got St. George slaying the dragon. And then next to that, you've got the absolutely wonderful example, again, a bit gruesome, showing the murder of Thomas à Becket, but just absolutely amazing detail and amazing preservation again. Above the badges, you've also got a pilgrim's ampulla, and this would have contained holy oil or holy water and would have been used as a sort of charm for healing sickness and that sort of thing. As well as Christian imagery, we've got older belief systems as well turning up. So in the top right, we've got the Roman items. So you've got a beautiful intaglio with the figure of Fortuna on it, and Fortuna was the personification of luck. And then next to that, you've got this absolutely wonderful figure of Mercury, who of course was the messenger of the gods. And we also get items from more modern religious practices. So the example down in the bottom right is an Arabic magic square, and it's probably a bit difficult to see, but it's got Arabic figures or sort of inscribed all over it in a kind of square pattern. And the last group, is kind of an everything else slide. So I've kind of really only scratched the surface of what sort of turns up, but I mean, we really get all sorts, from kind of everyday items like the key down in the bottom left, that's a medieval key, to slightly more bizarre items like the syringe up in the top right, made of bone. I've also got, you know, Victorian spectacles, a nice bit of stained glass in the middle, an early medieval horseshoe, which is absolutely fantastic, and in the middle, a dental implement, which I think is used for taking moulds of teeth. We also get quite a surprising number of false teeth washing up, but obviously these are a little bit too modern for us to record, so there aren't any on the database. So I thought I would just end with some of my favourite finds from London. It's really difficult to actually pick these because I mean, just the stuff that turns up, there's some really cool things, but I've managed to narrow it down to these 5. So top left, you've got this beautiful ceramic oil lamp. It's Roman. It's amazingly intact. Sort of still blows me away actually. And it basically came out the foreshore that way as well, as you can see from the picture in the bottom left. And it's just a remarkable survivor really. So it came to London from the manufacturing workshop in North Africa. It's then survived use in Roman times, and then another 2,000 years just in the river. But if you look at the decoration, it's kind of crisp and clear, almost like the day it was made, sorry. So it's absolutely beautiful, I love it. Next to that, we've got another beautiful intaglio. So this one's made out of a red stone, like carnelian, and again, it's Roman in date. And the reason that I like it is because it's got this beautiful carving of a hound chasing a hare. And I've got a pet greyhound, so I've got a bit of a soft spot for things with greyhounds on them. But also, I just think it's the most wonderful little picture. I mean, if you think about how big an intaglio is and how much kind of detail and life they've managed to get into that one tiny object, it's just lovely. Then in the top right corner, these 2 are just fantastic examples of items that have been made out of worked bone. So you've got this Roman hairpin with just this absolutely fabulous hairstyle. I mean, it's a little bit mad. And then next to that, this wonderful handle from a post-medieval ear scoop, which is in the shape of this kind of goat-like creature. And I just love both of these. They're just so expressive and just how detailed they are in their carving. And they're just like tiny little works of art. Yeah, I just love them. I've included the medieval mail armour just because of how well preserved it is. A lot of the times you'll just get like a kind of lump of rust that's got some mail inside it somewhere, but this one kind of looks as good as the day it was made. And also I think it just evokes images of kind of medieval knights and stuff. So yeah, it's just a cool little bit of object. And then finally, I just had to finish with a hand axe. I've got a soft spot for lithics, and I just think hand axes are the most beautiful objects. They're just tactile, you want to hold them. And this example is just absolutely beautiful. It's just a perfect hand axe shape, and this beautiful honey grey flint is just absolutely gorgeous. And so I just wanted to finish by saying a massive thank you to our finders. So obviously every find that's recorded is important because it helps us to piece together the story of our past. And we've currently got over 1.5 million objects recorded onto the database. And I can't overstate this enough, like they really are transforming our understanding of the past. But we couldn't do it without people bringing forward the objects to record. So basically, keep them coming. And here's a reminder of how to get in touch. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, brilliant. That's great, Lauren. Thank you so much for that. It was fascinating. I'm still in awe. I'm just like looking at all the amazing pictures and stuff. So yeah, that was really interesting. So thank you very much. Yeah. So we've like I said at the beginning, if you've got any questions for Lauren, please write them in the question and answer box. I should have mentioned at the start, but I forgot to say, is that the way we have these webinars set up, we're not able to unmute you as a participant. So what we'll do is I'll read out the question to Lauren and then she will answer them. I will also just forgot to say as well that we are going to be recording this session and putting it up on the Thames Discovery Programme YouTube channel in the next few weeks. So we'll put it up on our social media and our website when that's done, but keep an eye out. So if there's anything you missed, or if you had connection problems halfway through or anything like that and you want to catch up, keep an eye out for that and share it with your friends as well. So it should be there for you to see that way. Or I can see there's loads of questions coming in. So we'll make a start. I'll go through them as they've come in, basically. I think because obviously I've had a bit more experience on the foreshore itself than Lauren does, so we might split the questions a little bit between us about who answers what. But Lauren knows way more than me about the Portable Antiquities Scheme and the artifacts and stuff. So, okay, so the first question we had is from Gail, and she wants to know, based on the quiet traffic on the Thames over the last year due to the pandemic, how will the quantity or number of finds change when the foreshore reopens? I don't know, Lauren, whether you saw any differences this summer when things reopened again, or last summer.
I think that might be a question that our London flow would be better to answer. I mean, I think overall there has been a slowdown kind of across the country in finds coming in, just because everywhere's been going in and out of lockdown at like different times. I don't know, the river erosion one's a good point. I mean, how that might affect, how's that going to affect kind of your sites and stuff today?
Well, I mean, from what we've seen, because the boat traffic stopped, and that stirred up a lot of the sediment. So a lot of the foreshore, especially after the first lockdown, got covered in this layer of slime, which is probably helping to protect the archaeology, to be honest. And we know that there are some patches of erosion that are definitely being caused by the boat wash. So that has slowed that down. But then in other areas of the places that I did manage to visit this summer, you could see that there'd been the erosion had continued, basically. So there will be things that have been lost that haven't been recorded, which is a bit of a shame. But I think it's one of those things that we're going to find out over the next year or so as things open up again and as we're able to get back out onto our sites, see what picks up. Okay, the next question. Hi, Lauren. How can I apply to be a volunteer? Thank you.
That depends on which part of the country you're in. So all the volunteering is done with the local finds liaison officer. So you need to get in touch with whoever your local officer is, and you can find them on our contacts page, or or just drop us an email from any of the kind of things up on the screen there, or through Twitter or whatever. But not all of them are able to take volunteers on, so it's very sort of, it depends on the local situation, but most of them do have some sort of volunteering in place. So yeah, just get in touch and we'll let you know.
Great, thank you. One from Martin says that on the finds.org.uk/contacts website, there's no contact for Essex. So is there a flow for Essex?
No, we're in the process of recruiting for that post. So the flow that was there, she has actually gone up to the treasure trove unit in Scotland, which is pretty cool. So we're just sorting out getting a replacement for her, but hopefully soon.
Watch this space. Okay. Okay, next question. Wow, there's loads. It's brilliant. In terms of dates, what's the definition of post-medieval and modern as you used on your graphs? That's from Shelley.
Oof. That's so it's around about 1540. There's some reason to do with coinage, which is just escaping me at the moment, but it's around about 1540, so kind of early Tudors.
That's great. One From Sean, who'd like to know, are there any web training sessions available on self-recording on the database?
Yes, so you just need to get in touch with your local flow, because they are the ones that they'll forward the adverts on when they become available. So we are doing a lot of online training at the moment. So yeah, you just need to find out who your local flow is and make contact and ask them to send them the adverts on to you.
Great, thank you. One from Jerry. It's one of our volunteers as well, Jerry. So hi, Jerry. How were trade tokens used? Were they issued by one shop or trade and only recouped at the same place or business?
Oh my gosh. I should know this because I've done but we've got an online finds recording guide actually that goes into a lot more detail about the trade tokens and also the jetons as well, in case you're interested in that too. I think off the top of my head that yeah, different establishments would sort of issue them and you could redeem them just in that establishment. But I think also, oh gosh, it's all coming back to me a bit. They kind of replaced. They kind of come around when there was always a shortage in small denominations, and I think they kind of get outlawed at some point as well. I might be mangling this really badly, so I would double check our finds recording guide for like the perfect answer.
Yeah. I know that later on that sometimes the employers would issue them to their workers, and then the workers would only able to use them in the shops the employers wanted them to use them in. So yeah, right.
And the thing is with tokens, there's all these different types as well. So like the earlier ones were used for different purposes than the later ones. And then the ones that you mentioned there, sort of like the mining tokens and that sort of thing, they were a lot later. So it's, yeah, so they're quite an interesting history actually. So I definitely look at the guide.
Excellent. Another one from our volunteer, Margaret. Hi, Margaret. Who'd like to know, how old do you think the Arabic square is, the magic spell square?
So we've got a date of sort of 1900 to the modern day on that one. It's a bit of a long one, but it's kind of difficult to tell. But yeah, sort of 20th century.
They're definitely quite a common find on the Thames. I've found them in various forms. I found paper ones and things before now, laminated paper before and stuff like that. So yeah. Okay. And next question from Georgian. Is the database publicly searchable?
Yes. Yeah, it's free to access, and yeah, you can basically search it. You don't need to be part of a university or anything.
Okay. We've had quite a few people say really nice things about the talk tonight.
Thank you.
I just want to thank Laura for her sheer joyful presentation. I love the enthusiasm and I want to go finding right now. And that's from Joe. So thank you, Joe. And I know we've had a load more like that, and we'll definitely share those with Lauren as well.
Oh, thank you.
Question from Annette. Did Peter Fleming get his medal back?
I think if I remember rightly, they're in the process of getting them back to him, because I think some have turned up again recently as well. Like they've not got all of them yet, but I might be wrong there. I think Stuart probably knows a bit better, but I know they are trying to trace them back to him. He's very much still with us, so.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's
yeah.
Really good. It's a nice, good news story. It's unusual in archaeology to be able to relate things to an actual person, so it's really lovely when that happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, another one from one of our volunteers. This is from Maggie. In the graph part of the presentation on finds in London, what is a mount?
Oh. So that is one of our slightly catch-all terms, in that it's kind of something that's been attached onto something, but we're not completely sure of the function. We just know that it was kind of mounted onto something. So it could be anything from kind of things mounted onto kind of horse harnesses to kind of furniture mounts, whatever. It's kind of a big category. So.
Oh, that's fascinating. I've always thought it was just horses. So when I've seen that, I was always thinking to do with horses. I didn't realise it was anything like furniture and stuff.
No, I mean, obviously we try to pin it down to the function if we can, but for some things it's like really you can't tell. So mount is quite a useful one for, like, we know it was attached to something. And then obviously the beauty of the database is that the records can be updated anytime. So if somebody does know the answer, we can amend the record once it's been identified.
Brilliant. Okay, another question from Gail. During lockdown, have you been able to catch up in identifying finds?
So this has kind of varied across the country. So some of our flows were able to kind of continue doing the object recording and sort of working on backlogs. And then others got kind of redeployed. So if they worked for local authorities and stuff, they had to go and do other kind of COVID related roles. So obviously they were less able to do some of the finds recording. But I think by and large, we've managed to keep getting stuff recorded. And I know a lot of them is kind of taking things via email at the moment, because obviously we can't go out and meet finders or hand anything back at the moment.
Yeah, cool. Okay. One from Liz, who's another one of our volunteers, and I know is also a keen muddler. Really interesting talk, thank you. Some fabulous finds there. How secure is your funding regarding the future of the Portable Antiquities Scheme nationwide?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it's done at the moment on a sort of year-by-year basis, but we're funded by the DCMS, so it seems, yeah, pretty secure, I think.
That's great news, yes. And definitely, because you're providing such a great service to everyone, and a huge amount of information that I know researchers are using for all sorts of really interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely. Right. Long may you continue. Question from Jen: how do you tell the difference between a worked piece of stone and just a broken piece of stone?
That's a very timely question. We ran a lithics training session last week, which obviously covered exactly that. It's quite difficult. I think the more you kind of come across, you get a bit more practiced at it. But there are lots of kind of visual clues that you can look out for, kind of little things like the bulb of percussion, and you can see where things have kind of been deliberately flaked off, as opposed to where they've sort of just tumbled around in a river or something. But you know, always if in doubt, ask your finds liaison officer. But I will say, I think a lot of the time they're natural, they're not worked. I know people sort of see all sorts of things in rocks because they kind of fit into your hand nicely and all that sort of thing, but
yeah, a nicely shaped piece of flint, and it's really tactile, and it must be something. It's just the way that it's shaped.
Yeah, they're a bit tricksy.
They definitely are. Okay, one from Phil. What items are not allowed to be kept by the finder, e.g. they have to go to a museum?
So the only thing that has this obligation on it is the potential treasure. That like I said, there's this really specific definition of what kind of constitutes treasure, and then it goes through the treasure process, and the coroner decides whether or not it is treasure. If it isn't, then it just goes back to the finder. If it is, then it is offered to museums to see if they want to acquire it, and they don't always, so then even then it does still go back to the finder. But you know, a lot of the time it does. We do get a good few hundred that are acquired by museums each year. But I should say as well that finders of stuff that's not treasure as well, a lot of finders do end up donating kind of cool objects they find as well. So
yeah, great. One from Christine, who's another Thames Discovery Programme volunteer. It's so great to see so many people here. It's a bit of a weird setup, this, because it's not like Zoom where you can see people's faces, so just have to take the names. Do you have any advice for getting a PAS appointment? Many people I meet tell me that they cannot get one.
I mean, I guess I don't think there's any particular advice. I mean, the flows do get all of your emails. It's just like some areas in the country are a lot busier with finds than others, and it can just take that little bit longer to kind of get back to people. And obviously at the moment there are just no appointments due to all the COVID restrictions. So, you know, it will take a little bit of a while to kind of get back up and running whenever we're allowed to as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess just email, just keep emailing.
Great. Okay, the next one is, yeah, I think it's just patience, isn't it? And just remember that very, very busy people, and they will get to you as soon as they can. Does the London wreck, I don't know if you know what that is, Lauren, it's a wreck off Southend of a ship called the London, slightly confusingly. Does that come under the Portable Antiquities Scheme?
No, I think that is an archaeological site, isn't it?
Yeah.
That would be my understanding. Yeah.
So the London wreck itself is an archaeological site that's been investigated with a group of volunteers, and I think the Historic England and I think also the Nautical Archaeology Society are also involved in that, and they've been monitoring and lifting artifacts off that wreck for several years now, and it's amazing if you look it up on their social media and stuff. Some of the stuff they've been finding on there is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's Cromwellian period. There is a separate scheme for artifacts that are found at sea. That name I can't remember, but sometimes fishermen and stuff bring up
it's
things.
the Marine Antiquities Scheme.
Yeah. It's not my area because Thames Discovery, we don't go underwater. we stay on the land that's revealed once the tide goes out. But yeah, there are kind of parallel schemes for divers and for fishermen and things who might be anything.
Yeah, I think they've got a similar database. It's the Marine Antiquities Scheme, and I imagine the stuff off that wreck, if it's being kind of done as part of a project, then all of those artifacts will be recorded in kind of like the excavation reports for that, so they wouldn't come to us.
No, and I think they have had some on display at Southend Museum, and I think they will have more. I think the plans are for that as well. A little comment from Yvonne and George, who are volunteers with Thames Discovery, and thank you so much for ending with the hand axe that they found at Richmond.
Oh, brilliant. You're welcome. It's lovely. It's so lovely.
They've found some amazing stuff. Okay. Question from David. Do you know why there's so many old metal nails on the foreshore, and how do you recognise a really old nail? I can take that one if you don't.
Yeah, I think I've got no expertise in the nail area.
there's lots of nails on the foreshore because well, there's two reasons. It's shipbuilding and ship breaking, basically, and repairing of boats, and you will often find them in areas where they were, well, like I say, repairing boats or building boats. The old ones are generally the ones that look like they've been handmade. I'm not a massive nail expert on dating and things, but yeah, and but there are bits of the foreshore which is basically just solidly nails, and there were a lot of boats that were needing repairs. Okay, just scroll down. There's been so many people saying thank you and how great it is. How much, okay, this is from Alison. How much is the license you need for searching the Thames Foreshore, and where do you get it from? So Alison, I just checked on the Port of London Authority's website, and they are the people that you get the license from to search the foreshore, because they're effectively the landowners of the foreshore. So they've put their fees up this year, so it's now £90 for an adult license. And they've also introduced, I don't know whether this is new this year or it's relatively new anyway. Then there's now 2 tiers of junior licenses for 12 to 14-year-olds and 15 to 17-year-olds, and they're cheaper than the full adult license. But children, if they're going, have to be accompanied by a permit holding adult as well. And they've also increased the cost of the one-off temporary license. So they're calling it the monthly permit, which means that you're allowed to visit the foreshore once within a month, and that's £40. So if you're coming to London as a tourist and want to go out mudlarking, then you have to get it that way. And you get them from the Port of London Authority's webpage, and it's if you go on their webpage, it's on the environment section, and if you click on that, and then you'll find archaeology, and then there's a link to apply for the permits there, and it's all done online now, so you just fill out the online form, make your payment, and then you'll get an email back with your license. You don't get a little plastic card anymore. So yes, Port of London Authority basically. Okay. Right, this is one from Sarah. I have read from a blog online that ceramics and delftware are one of the most found objects in the river. Is that right? And if yes, is it recorded as the most objects on the shores, as the graphs in the talk didn't mention them? So this is about ceramic finds and delftware.
Yeah, so ceramics were yeah, they were on the graph because they do I mean they're kind of the bread and butter of archaeology really. But yeah, I mean the foreshore's just covered in them, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we do record some of them. So I mean, I don't know if everyone can still see the image here, but like the medieval floor tiles down in the bottom left, we record those, and the kind of examples of like Roman Samian ware and stuff like that. And we not record all of them. I mean, if it's just a sherd, plain sherd, I mean, it doesn't tell us too much. It's kind of on a case by case basis, but yeah, we do. There are. I think they were sort of was it the third or fourth most recorded thing in London? So
yeah, and there's, I mean, I think it's just that there's so much of it, it just doesn't get recorded, so it's then not reflected on the graphs, because the graphs are the things that get through to the database. But yeah, I don't think anyone's ever done a full quantitative study of like how many of different kinds of finds you do find on the foreshore. So yeah, it would be hard to count. I would suspect it is ceramics or bricks if you're going by weight, bricks and pile. Okay, we have a question. We've had a couple of questions asking about the Scottish system, so I don't know whether you know how it works in Scotland.
So I know a little bit. So they've got their own unit up there. It's the treasure trove unit, and in Scotland, all finds have to be reported. So not just treasure, but everything, and it all goes through the treasure trove unit up there. And I think they've got like an internal database that it gets recorded on. And I think, yeah, that's about as much as I know about it. But I do know that everything has to be shown to them, not just the treasure.
Oh, great. Well, there's so many questions. I might start just filtering them out a little bit. I'm going to be here all evening. Do you only include man-made objects on the Portable Antiquities Scheme? What about things like fossils?
We've got, there are a couple of things that would probably count as fossil. I think, you know, like animal teeth and stuff, but not as a rule. We wouldn't sort of tend to record a lot of that. It's just kind of stuff like, I think there was like a mammoth tooth that got recorded somewhere, I think Derbyshire or somewhere like that, because it's kind of, yeah. Sorry, I'm not sort of garbling it a little bit, but generally, like fossils aren't really a sort of archaeology thing, so we would tend not to record them. But we've got assemblages of things like animal bones and things, so it's not completely man-made, but it's mostly man-made.
Great, thank you. One from Jane would like to know, why are there substantially fewer finds from the early medieval period compared to the Roman and medieval periods?
Well, the early medieval is kind of the period that was traditionally known as the Dark Ages. So there was just a sort of kind of lack of objects, sort of material culture for one reason or another. So it's kind of not like a specifically London thing. It's kind of like a national thing. Obviously, I'm not a specialist in that period, but yeah, it's just not quite as artifact rich as some of the other periods.
Yeah, there was a change in the material culture basically in that period, which means that just overall we find less artifacts and different kinds of artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To report finds to your flow, does it have to be the flow for the location where you found it, or can it be to your local flow?
It's usually the one who's like local to where you live, because I mean, in normal times, it's all about you being able to take the find in to show them. So obviously it makes more sense to go to the one who's nearby where you live.
That's great. So a question was two questions from Michelle and Matilda that are kind of related. So Michelle wanted to know, she's found a bone die last year in the Thames estuary. Should she report it? And then Matilda was also asking about how you identify the age of bone dies.
I mean, I think it's quite tricky because obviously the form of them hasn't changed massively since, you know, a dice is a dice kind of thing. If I remember rightly, I think some people have kind of, they can date them depending on the pattern, the way the different dot sides are like laid out. So which sides are opposite the others, if that makes sense. And yeah, I definitely say it's worth getting in touch with your flow. Because we, like, as you can see, we do record them, so we do like to see them.
Okay, one from Corinne would like to know if you've had any interesting brothel tokens.
I think that there have been one or two from London, but whether they can like definitely be called brothel tokens or not is kind of up for debate. So yeah.
Okay, one from Julie. Have you ever had any fabric finds preserved in the foreshore?
So we get, I mean, it's not, I guess it doesn't count as fabric. I don't know. There's a lot of leather, just because of the preservation quality. So you get lots of shoes, and I think there's like something that's like a leather sleeve, kind of Tudor leather sleeve, which is kind of cool. There's not actually a lot of fabric on the database, so I'm just kind of trying to think, because obviously it doesn't kind of preserve that well generally. You sometimes get it on objects where it's kind of been preserved within like a corrosion layer, so sometimes you get it kind of sandwiched between kind of like a buckle plate or something like that. But yeah, it's quite rare on the database generally.
Yes, I'm trying to think. I don't think we find a lot of things like ropes and things. Very occasionally found bits and pieces that might be cloth, but it's really hard to say whether that's something recent or not. And there's been occasions where I've wondered whether it's something that could be reported or not, but it's just a bit of woven something or other. So yeah, I don't like personally from the foreshore. I mean, there probably have been bits of fabric, and I think there's been like lace shapes and stuff where maybe there's a bit of fabric caught in them and stuff like that. One from Felicity who'd like to know, what sort of activities or outreach do you do to engage kids with finds and archaeology?
So we've recently worked with the Young Archaeologists Club to kind of create a resource pack that's got activities and stuff, so people can kind of learn about it via their local Young Archaeologists Club branch. And we've got kind of loads of activities and stuff online that we've been releasing, especially during kind of lockdown, sort of boredom busting things. And then you know, finds liaison officers in, again, normal times, will go into places like schools and things to do talks and stuff. And then when their host organisation has kind of open days and stuff, they'll have activities and things then as well. So it's kind of a mixture.
Great. Okay, we've just got a few more. Let me just find out where we are. I'm scrolling up and down the list. Do you have any plans to produce a book of finds? I'd love to purchase a book.
We've got quite a few publications through the scheme actually. So the two like kind of big coffee table type books, are Finds Identified and Finds Identified 2. And those are yeah, sort of big chunky books with loads of finds in them. And then quite a few of the counties have done our 50 finds series, and that's where they just look at 50 finds from that particular county in detail. And yeah, and there's a few others in there. So I think we've got 50 Roman coin finds coming out soon and things like that. So we've got a few things published. But yeah, probably Finds Identified and Volume 1 and 2 are probably like the nicest ones to look at.
Yes, yeah, definitely worth looking at. And not by the Portable Antiquities Scheme, but there is a new Shire publications book out on Thames mud larking that's just been published, I think, which has also got some really beautiful pictures of some of the artifacts we've seen today, but other ones as well. So it's worth looking that up as well. Let's just see, there's a few more. I'm just trying to find them on the long list. So there's one from Patty who asked, are you just allowed to walk on the foreshore? Yeah, in London, Patty, yes, you are allowed to go down onto the foreshore, but if you want to search for artifacts, then you do need to have a permit. And as somebody else mentioned in the comments, the £90 permit does cover you for 3 years. So it is quite, if you're able to visit the foreshore more than once, then it is value for money that way. But yeah, the foreshore is an open space that anyone can access, so long as, you know, make sure you check the tides and make sure you know where your entrances and exits are when you're down there, to make sure that you can get away if you need to. If you're not sure about going down there by yourself, once things open up again, we do run guided walks with Thames Discovery Programme, so keep an eye out on our social media and our website for when we're doing public walks again, because we're quite able to take you down there and show you some of the archaeological features we look at, and also help you look at some of the artifacts as well that you find down there. So there was one last question I was going to ask from Mindy. Regarding the finds liaison officers, what are the qualifications or education that you're required to have to become one?
So I think most of them have got an archaeology background, but not all of them actually. And obviously we've got a few people who've got masters and PhDs, but that's not kind of a requirement. It's more that it's kind of like equivalent experience of looking at archaeological finds and identifying them, and kind of, you know, an archaeological fieldwork background, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, I'm going to call it a day there, I reckon. There's quite a few other questions and stuff, and if you still have a burning question that hasn't been answered, feel free to drop us a message at Thames Discovery Programme, and we'll be quite happy to get back to you either on our social media or on email. Our email's thamesdiscovery@mola.org.uk, and we're more than happy to help you out. Just bear in mind that all of the team, we're part-time at the moment, and one of our members of the team has been furloughed as well, so it might take us a little while to get back to you, because obviously we haven't quite got as much capacity as we did. But yeah, thank you so much everyone who joined us today and stayed for the whole session as well. It's been really great, and thank you so much, Lauren. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Great, thanks for having me.